There are rail links which were not there before. There are bus movements. There is tourism. So if you take the totality of it, I would say the deeper, the stronger you can make these linkages, the more you proof it really against the volatility which is inherent in neighborly ties. But there is another aspect of it, and that relates to the state of the world. If the state of the world continues to be volatile, and there's every reason for us to expect that, our neighbors actually need to shelter in that storm, and we are part of that shelter. So if you look today, I spoke about Sri Lanka, where their economy was literally melting down. And it was a combination really of the delayed after effects of the COVID and the Ukraine consequences for them, and some issues of their own. But what our neighbors today do see, that whether it is food shortage, fertilizer shortage, vaccine issues, any essential commodities, financial support, there is India. And I think if that sense of reassurance and reliability gets stronger and deeper, it actually deals with a lot of other challenges. So I cannot expect that those challenges will not happen, because the politics of their particular societies will throw up those kinds of problems. What I have to do is to create a structure which allows me to deal with those anticipated issues. It's interesting. Again, it's natural in our neighborhood that people would say that in some form or the other we are interfering. The truth is actually the neighbors try to pull you into their politics. When it suits them, they want you in. When it doesn't suit them, they want you out. So our challenge is actually how to get it right. So the neighborhood is truly, the entire neighborhood is a conundrum. We have individual conundrums there. And I would say it will always be, a situation where we will have issues, we will be dealing with issues. It's not, by very nature, the relationships where I would say we should have very, very high and continuous expectations. Now, if I can briefly shift to the major powers. The major powers, let me start with the United States. In Rajiv's book, of course, he has a big segment on the nuclear deal. It's the part where I disagree most with him. But I would say at the end of it all, I think the message of the US chapter is that all is well that ends well. So he recognizes at the end of it all that today, the US relationship is both for strategic purposes and for economic purposes, in many ways a very invaluable relationship for us. Now, where the US is concerned, I again accept the history. I think none of us are in denial, and he brings it out in quite graphically but succinctly. We've had a series of challenges with the United States in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. The challenge for us is when we think of multipolarity and strategic autonomy, because of that history, it is often a concept where we posit ourselves against the United States. Now, the reality of the world is today something very different. That if we look at where the pressures are, the primary sources of pressure, they're no longer the United States. So, in a way, because the world has changed, our understanding of the US has changed, and by the way, the US understanding of us has too. And therefore, I would actually argue that US is today indispensable for our multipolarity to go ahead. That if we need that decision-making space, that freedom, we need countries whose interest it is that we have those margins on our side. So, I would also say in some ways, and again, I think in a way, a lot of what Rajiv's apprehensions are based on history. I don't dispute the history, but I think today, we need, when we look at the US, we must also understand, we are talking about convergences. I don't think anybody sober and sensible in policy making would say that, we have a congruence with the United States. I mean, the US by its very nature and India by its very nature will always have interests which will differ and diverge from those of the other partner. So if we actually understand what are the expectations of this relationship, that this relationship is not about, it's not about an alliance, it is not about congruence, it is about convergence, it is about overlapping interests, it is about the ability to work together on issues and areas and theaters which suit us. And you can see that. Even today, there are regions and issues on which we profoundly agree with the US. And there are clearly some issues on which we don't. It's on full public display. And that is where, in a way, I was again struck by an observation which Rajiv makes in the book, and I sort of quote it for you, where he says, we need to accurately gauge and leverage the compulsions of the United States to seek a better relationship with India. And this bit I don't entirely agree. Wait till the relative balance of power is less tilted in favor of the United States. Now, I don't have a problem with the end objective, but I have a problem with that wait. Because I don't think in this world we can cold start a relationship at some point where it's convenient for us. I think we saw the opportunity, we saw the opportunity when it came. I would say the record of the last 20 years bears out the fact that the choices which were made in respect of this relationship have actually been the right ones. I think today, if you look at our strategic position, a lot of it is derived from that. Where China is concerned, again, what Rajiv does is he brings out the duality of the unavoidable economic factors and counterposes it with a strategic challenge. I think it's something which is widely accepted today in this country. What I did appreciate was his recognition that in the last few years we have done something, not enough in my view, but still something substantial to fix the border infrastructure deficit. And I think that is really key today to maintaining peace and tranquility in the border areas. He has mentioned in passing the economic gaps. Again, I really think it's a subject worth dilating upon, which is the neglect of manufacturing in this country and the costs that we are paying as a result, and the gaps that, on the one hand, the same people who block manufacturing in this country also then chastise the government about the trade gaps with China. So they want to have it both ways, and I think in all honesty that should be called out. And the other point really is the strategic confusion about China. That we could actually describe this as a strategic and cooperative partnership in 2005. If you look back upon it, I think it's an astounding mistake. So the fact is that we have today to deal with China in a global framework, and I think that's really the point which comes out. Where Russia is concerned, I'd like to quote Rajiv here. He calls it a strategic but unequal partnership that has made India more self-reliant. I'm not sure anybody would really differ with that. But what I would say today is that Russia now is is following its own Little's policy. That after 2022, there has been a profound shift in the manner in which Russia approaches the world, looks at the world. And we in India need to understand, absorb and take advantage of it, rather than let our decisions be clouded by a larger narrative which is not our narrative. So, where Russia is concerned, I think again, there is a Eurasian balance that we have to be sensitive to. It's a core strategic requirement for us. But I would also say, if you look at trade with Russia, which has gone up 5 times, and it's not just a simple oil issue. I think I would urge you to look at it much more deeply. But there is an economic complementarity between India and Russia, and we should not be intimidated from pursuing the advantages of that complementarity. On other P5 members, I think he's given that a short shrift. I would have hoped he would have been kinder to France, UK, and the European Union, maybe the next book. But all in all, I would say, where the big powers are concerned, for us, the metric of judgment should be really, the way we look at the conundrum, where is our national security benefits or risks in that relationship? Does it help the growth of our comprehensive national power? Does it expand our freedom of choice? I think these should be the basic metrics. So finally, let me come to the conclusion. I'm sorry I've diluted a bit more than I intended. On the conclusion, one, of course, I sum up in a way his last chapter, which is that we need to assess the global order, and that's like the contemporary way of saying what Swami Vivekananda did then, that we are not living in isolation, that we have to look at the state of the world and make our calculations accordingly. To the point that geography matters, I do think it matters, but I also think it is not self-fulfilling. So today when we look at IMEC or INSTC or the polar route or even Indo-Pacific, I think each one of this is a testimony to the fact that geography matters. On neighborhood, because a very large part of the book is on neighborhood, I think as I say, the challenge is to get the balance right. But overall, I totally agree with him that India must be a lifting tide for the entire neighborhood. I mean, that should be our policy, and to my mind, that means a generous and non-reciprocal policy, but a policy where there has to be sensitivity to our, especially to our national security requirements. There is in the neighborhood, of course, put China aside, but I think Pakistan is to some degree an exception to that approach. On the extended neighborhood, which he also speaks about, you can see in the last few years a significant evolution in Indian thinking, at least in policy making thinking. So where it comes to maritime security, you have the Sagar outlook, and when it comes, the kind of priority which today is given to the Gulf was badly needed. But if you look even at a country like UAE, it says something about us that between Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi, no other Prime Minister of India even went there. If you look at Southeast Asia, I would say the big change, and it's certainly for us right now a source of frustration, is the physical connectivity, because it's got stuck in Myanmar. But it is something we have to make unstuck, and a lot of our Myanmar policy will revolve around what we have to do to get that connectivity going. If you ask me today, if I were to prioritize my Myanmar requirements, that would be right up there. On the global south, definitely it's a constituency, definitely it is a base. As India rises, I think the global south has an interest in actually also identifying with India and working with us. And again, I must tell you, Global South is a concept on which I've heard criticisms from actually all the P5, which means I must be doing something right. On the overall, as I say, I too would, in that sense, end with Swami Vivekananda, which is, there is a world out there, we have to be very conscious of it. And the mistakes that we have made in our history of either isolating ourselves or lack of faith and confidence in our own abilities, I think these are our big challenges. I'm very confident that that will not happen now. But once again, let me conclude by congratulating Ambassador Rajiv Sikri on a book which I don't know about you, but at least it set me off. My batchmate Yogendra Kumar, who's sitting at the back, would bear me out, that the first person we met in the Ministry of External Affairs when we clocked in there in 1977 was Rajiv Sikri. Now, over the years, our careers crisscrossed, and we spoke a lot, we often disagreed, but he was always very open about talking to people with whom he didn't necessarily agree. And I see today's occasion as a continuing conversation with him. Now, first of all, I'd like to congratulate him. I can now feel, I now know what it's like to be an author and the pride which you have when you bring out a book. So once again, my felicitations. But I do want to say that the reason why such books are important is that for any country, particularly a country aspiring to be a leading power, you develop your foreign policy through dialogue, through discourse, through debates, through a churning. And such occasions are part of that. Now, the other, I would say, reason which I felt was this book was important is that it's written in a way for the generalist. It is not written for the MEA by the MEA. So the language is simple, the concepts are clear, the structure is such that somebody can relate to it quite easily. And I value that because I think it's very important today to demystify foreign policy. My own endeavors in the last few years is to take foreign policy out of MEA and out of Delhi and try to actually get a larger national conversation started up on it. Now, on the book itself, he was good enough to give me a copy in advance. I would say I agree with some of it. I'm agnostic about some parts of it. I disagree politely with some of it. There are a few honorable mentions of me. I'm also a member of the small cabal about which he is more critical when it comes to the US nuclear deal. But that said, I think I took the book in the spirit in which it is written. Now, I also want to say that, the way the case has been presented, it's not unrealistic, because often, I need to be honest here, there's a kind of wisdom which comes after retirement, okay? And it's amazing how people forget what the constraints and limitations of government is. So what I liked about the book is it's practical, it's grounded, it doesn't over-prescribe, and whether it's the general person, the average person, or someone in the business, it's something very easy to relate to. Now, having said that, I want to really focus on the title. And the title for this reason, that what Rajiv has done is, he has framed it as conundrums. And I want you to reflect on that word conundrum. Because normally, in the diplomatic world, we would phrase it as relationships, as landscapes, as scenarios. But a conundrum is by definition confusing, it's difficult, it's a bit of a riddle, it can be a challenge, and most of all it conveys a certain complexity. And I'm very glad he did that, because sometimes when we debate foreign policy, we are in the danger of sliding into very black and white options and scenarios where people simplify it, they really dumb it down more to make a polemical point than to actually carry out serious analysis. Now, if we are looking at conundrums, for every country in the world, neighbors are always a conundrum, because neighboring relationships for every country in the world are the most difficult, and they can never be solved. They are continuing relationships which will always throw up problems. So when people sometimes come and say, that's happened in Bangladesh and this has happened in Maldives, I think they need to look around the world and tell me which country in the world doesn't have challenges and problems and complexities vis-a-vis its neighbors. I think it's in the very nature of being a neighbor that this will happen. And in fact, the very closeness, which is the definition of a neighbor, is actually the complication. And there are other aspects of it, I think some of which Rajiv spoke about. The second are major powers. Major powers, again, will always be a conundrum because they are major, because of the breadth of their interests, that they will always have an agenda which will overlap with us, but will, to different degrees, also diverge with us. So, to me, the focus of the book and the description of each of these relationships as a conundrum, I think, is a very sensible, realistic way of actually explaining what awaits us. Now, I would only add that in the case of China, you actually have a double conundrum. They're a neighbor and a major power. So he spoke about the challenges of China. Part of it, as I said, is the fact that they fit this double definition. Now, let me say a few words about the neighbors. So, Rajiv speaks about Akhand Bharat. I take that as a message about the importance of regionalization. And I think that's a real issue that today this country needs to debate and certainly practice and see how we get regionalization right, because as the biggest country of the region, we will be the biggest beneficiaries of deeper regionalization. So the question for us there is, with whom and on what terms do we regionalize? And some of the models here, in a way, there is a debate today in the country about, and not just in the country, in the neighborhood, about SARC and BIMSTEC, and all of you know the difference. I think that is a contrast which illustrates some of the challenges and the opportunities of regionalization. I think it's also in the neighborhood, and that's a subject I will dilate on further. The real issue is that of overlapping identities and versus forging new ones. So everywhere there is history at play, But there is politics which often contests history, and this in a way is a perennial challenge for India's relationship with all its neighbors. Now, I'm following the structure of the book. If we start with the neighbors, and Rajiv has started with Pakistan. So let me say this. I think the era of uninterrupted dialogue with Pakistan is over. Actions have consequences. And insofar as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, I think 370 is done. So the issue today is what kind of relationship can we possibly contemplate with Pakistan. Rajiv suggests that perhaps India is content to continue at the current level of relationship. Maybe yes, maybe no. What I do want to say is we are not passive, and whether events take a positive or a negative direction, either way we will react to it. Let me move to Afghanistan. Where Afghanistan is concerned, I think there are, I know we use this phrase often, but there's actually strong people-to-people relations. There is actually at a societal level, there is a certain goodwill for India. But as we look at Afghanistan, I think the basics of statecraft should not be forgotten. There is international relations 101 at work here. So when we today review our Afghan policy, I think we are very clear-eyed about our interests. We are not confused by inherited wisdom that is before us. And we must appreciate that the Afghanistan with the presence of America for us is very different from the Afghanistan without the presence of America. Having said that, let me move to India's east, Bangladesh, for obvious reasons. A lot of recent, interest in that relationship. And I actually was struck by Rajiv's description. He